Matteo Salvatore stood in a dark garden behind a small house, in the rain, and waited for a woman to make one mistake. He was 40 years old. He was the head of the Salvatore family. In 9 days, he was going to marry Camilla Vitale, and half the city was already talking about the wedding. Men like Matteo did not stand in wet gardens at midnight. Men like Matteo sent other men. But this was different. This was Ava. 4 years ago, Ava Bennett had walked into his office with a cheap bag and a plain grey coat, and she had done something nobody else in his world ever did. She told him the truth. She told him when his accountant was skimming money. She told him when his cousin was drinking too much and talking too much. Once in a room full of dangerous men, she told him he was wrong, and she did it calmly, and she was right. For 4 years, she was the only person in Matteo Salvatore's life who wanted nothing from him. And then, 6 weeks ago, Ava Bennett began to lie. It started small. She stopped staying late. Every evening at 6 o'clock exactly, she took her coat and left, even when the work was not finished. She, who had once worked 3 nights straight during the port problem. Then came the phone calls, a number nobody could trace. She always walked out of the room to answer it, always. Then the money. Every month, large amounts leaving her account. Not to a shop, not to a landlord. To nothing. To a name that did not exist. Matteo told himself it was her business. A sick parent, maybe. A bad man in her life. Everyone has a private life. Then 4 days ago, his head of security placed 3 photographs on his desk. The first showed Ava at a night pharmacy at 2 in the morning. The second showed what she was buying. Burn dressings, bandages, strong painkillers, the kind you cannot get without a doctor. The third photograph showed her carrying a bag of men's clothes. Matteo had looked at that third photograph for a long time. Boss, his security man had said carefully, she is hiding a man. That evening, Camilla came to his study in a red dress, sat on the arm of his chair, and touched his hair, the way she always did. You're still thinking about the girl, she said. I am thinking, Matteo answered. Then let me think for you. Camilla's voice was soft as silk. She knows your routes. She knows your accounts. She knows which door you use when you come home. And now she is feeding a man in secret and buying medicine at 2 in the morning. My love, that is not a private life. That is a man in a room who is waiting to get well enough to hold a gun. She kissed the top of his head. Give me one word, she said, and by tomorrow morning the problem is finished. And that was the moment something in Matteo's chest went cold. Not because of Ava, because Camilla had said it so easily. He remembered his father's voice from a long time ago. Never let another person kill for you until you have seen the thing with your own eyes. Other people's eyes lie, Matteo. Yours cost more. So he said no. He said he would handle it himself. He told his driver he was going to the club, and he did not go to the club. He went alone. Now he stood in the wet grass behind a small house at the end of Wren Street. No guards, no headlights, just him, a coat and the rain running down the back of his neck. The house was old and small. Yellow paint, half washed away. A broken gate. A back window with a thin curtain that did not close all the way. Warm light came through that gap. Matteo moved closer, slowly, staying in the shadow of the wall, and he looked in. He saw a kitchen, a small table, a kettle. On the wall, a calendar with days crossed out in red pen. And he saw Ava. She was not dressed like the woman he knew. No suit, no neat hair. She wore an old sweater with a hole in the sleeve. She looked thinner than she had 6 weeks ago. She looked like a person who had not slept properly in a very long time. She was standing at the counter, filling a syringe from a small glass bottle, and her hands were steady, like someone who had done it 100 times before. Then she spoke, and Matteo could just hear her through the thin glass. It is a little early tonight, she said gently. But you had a bad afternoon, so we are not going to be brave about it, someone answered her. A man's voice. It was low and rough and broken, like a voice that had breathed smoke once and never fully recovered. It came from another room, out of sight. You spoil me, the voice said. Ava smiled at nothing, the way tired people do. Somebody has to. The man was quiet for a moment. Then he said something else, and every drop of blood in Matteo Salvatore's body turned to ice water. "Did you see him today?" the voice asked. "Was he all right?" "He was fine," Ava said softly. "Good," a slow breath, a sound of pain quickly hidden. "He always worked too hard, my brother. You have to make him eat, Ava. Teo forgets to eat when he is angry. Teo. Nobody in the world called Matteo Salvatore Teo. Nobody, except one person. And Matteo had carried that person's coffin himself 3 years ago, in the rain, past 200 crying people, and had put him in the ground with his own hands. The rain kept falling. The kitchen light kept burning. And behind the thin curtain of a small yellow house, a dead man asked again if his brother had eaten. Matteo Salvatore did not knock. He walked around the house, put his hand on the back door and pushed. It was not even locked. In his world, an unlocked door meant a person who had nothing left to lose. The kitchen was warm. It smelled of soup and medicine. Ava turned around with the syringe still in her hand, and when she saw him standing in her doorway with rain running off his coat, the syringe fell out of her fingers and rolled across the floor. She did not scream. She did not run. She stepped in front of the hallway door, opened her arms wide, and blocked it with her body. "Sir," she said. Her voice was shaking. "Please go back to your car. Move, Ava, please. Whatever your men told you, it is wrong. Just go and I will explain everything tomorrow. I swear it. Ava." He said her name quietly. "Move." No. 4 years he had known this woman. She had never once said no to him. He looked at her face and understood something strange. She was not afraid of him. She was afraid for someone. Matteo took her gently by the shoulders and set her aside, the way you move a chair, and he opened the door. The room behind it was small. 1 lamp, 1 bed. A machine near the wall with a tube running from it. A man was sitting up against the pillows. Half of his face was smooth and burned, pulled tight like melted wax, from the jaw up to the hairline. His left hand was wrapped in white bandage. He was too thin, and his hair had grown back wrong in patches. But the right side of his face had not changed at all, and the eyes had not changed at all. Matteo Salvatore, the man other men were afraid to look at directly, went down onto his knees on the floor of a stranger's bedroom. "Nico," he said. His brother tried to smile. The burned side did not move. "Hello, Teo." For a long moment neither of them could speak. "I carried your coffin," Matteo finally said. His voice broke in the middle. "I carried it with my own shoulders. 200 people came. I put your mother's ring in that box. I stood at that grave every month for 3 years. Every month, Nico." "I know," Nico said softly. "She told me." "Every time." Matteo turned his head. Ava was standing in the doorway with her hands pressed over her mouth, crying without any sound at all. 3 years, Matteo said to her. 3 years, and you looked at me every single day and you said nothing. He begged me, Ava whispered. You worked 10 steps away from me. He begged me, she said, and her voice finally cracked open. The first night I found him, he could not even speak, and the first thing he wrote on a piece of paper was, "Do not tell my brother." I asked him why for 2 years. 2 years, sir. He would never say. And every night I came home from your office and I looked at him and I hated myself. But he was breathing. That was all I had. How did you find him? Ava wiped her face with her sleeve. The city hospital. The charity burn ward. I was there because my landlady had fallen and broken her hip. I walked past a bed with a man in it with no name. They had him as John Doe, bed 9. Everyone said he would die by Friday. She looked at Nico. His right hand was outside the blanket, she said. And on the inside of his wrist there was a small tattoo. 3 lines and a star. I had seen that tattoo before. On your wrist, sir. And on your father's photograph in your office. Matteo closed his eyes. The Salvatore mark. Their father had put it on both his sons with a needle and ink when they were boys, on the same afternoon, in the same kitchen. I paid the hospital in cash under another name, Ava said. I moved him here when he could be moved. I sold my mother's house. I sold my car. I did not care about the money. Matteo looked at the machine, the medicine bottles, the calendar on the wall with red crosses on the days. Every large payment that had left her account for 3 years suddenly had a face. He turned back to his brother. "Nico," he said, "the fire. They told me it was the wiring. They told me you fell asleep in the office at the old warehouse." Nico was quiet. "Nico, I did not fall asleep," his brother said. "I went there to meet someone, and when the smoke started, I ran to the back door, because you and I used that door 100 times as kids." He stopped. His breathing had gone shallow. "It was bolted," he said, "from the outside." The room went completely silent. "I heard it," Nico said, "the bolt. Somebody stood on the other side of that door and slid it shut, while I was screaming and hitting it with my hands. That is why my left hand looks like this." Matteo did not move. Inside his chest, something old and dangerous was waking up. "Give me the name," he said. "I never saw his face." "Then give me the name of whoever called you to that warehouse." Nico looked at his brother for a long moment. Then he shook his head slowly. "Not yet," he said. "If I say that name tonight, you will walk out of this house and be dead before Sunday. And then everything Ava gave up for 3 years will be for nothing. Nico, so I will give you a smaller question instead," his brother said quietly. "And you are going to hate the answer." He leaned forward, and the lamplight fell across the ruined side of his face. "There was a body in that coffin, Teo. That is a fact. Somebody was burned in that building that night, and it was not me." Matteo's mouth had gone dry. "So ask yourself one thing," Nico said. "Who found that body? Who looked at what was left of a burned man and told you, with tears in her eyes, that it was your little brother?" And Matteo Salvatore remembered. He remembered a woman in a black dress screaming in the ashes. He remembered her handing him a melted ring. He remembered holding her while she shook. Camilla, the woman he was going to marry in 9 days. Matteo Salvatore drove home at 5 in the morning with the rain still on his shoulders, and by the time he parked in his own garage, he had made a decision. He would say nothing, not to his men, not to his cousins, not to a single person in the family. Because somebody had bolted a door with his brother behind it, and that somebody was close enough to stand next to him at a funeral. At 8 o'clock, Camilla came into the breakfast room in a white robe, smelling of expensive perfume, and kissed his cheek. "You came home very late, my love." "The club," Matteo said, and buttered his bread. "Was the girl there?" "Which girl?" "Your assistant." Camilla smiled and sat down. "Have you decided what to do about her?" Matteo lifted his eyes. 3 years of dinners, 3 years of this face across a table. "I am still watching her," he said calmly. "When I am sure, I will act." "Good." Camilla poured her coffee. "You know I only want what is best for this family." "I know exactly what you want," Matteo said. And he smiled at her, and she smiled back, and neither of them meant it. Dr. Emile Rossi had signed his brother's death certificate 3 years ago. He had been the family doctor for 30 years. Now he was 71 and lived alone in a flat above a bakery on the east side. When he opened the door and saw who was standing there, his hand began to shake on the handle. "Mr. Salvatore," he said, "this is a surprise." "Yes," Matteo said and walked in. He sat down in the old man's small living room, took off his gloves, and placed them on his knee, one on top of the other, very neatly. "Doctor," he said, "I want to talk about my brother's body." The old man's face lost all its color. "It was a terrible night," Rossi said quickly. "Terrible. The fire was very hot, you understand. There was very little—" "Did you check his teeth?" Silence. "Dental records," Matteo said. "That is what you do when a body is burned. That is the law. Did you check them?" "There was no need," the doctor whispered. "The identification was made by the family immediately, at the scene." "By whom?" "By Miss Vitale. She was there when the fireman brought him out. She knew him. She had the ring." "And you signed a paper," Matteo said quietly, "that put a man in my family's grave on the word of a crying woman holding a ring." The doctor's hands were shaking so badly now that he had to hold them together. "Please," he said. "Doctor?" Matteo leaned forward. "You have known me since I was 6 years old. So I am going to ask you one time, and you will not lie to me. How much did they pay you?" The old man sat down slowly on the edge of his chair, like a man whose legs had finally given up. after 3 years. 40,000, he said, in an envelope. It came the day after the funeral. There was no name on it, no note, just money. And you kept it. I have a daughter in another country, Mr. Salvatore, the doctor said, and his eyes were wet. I am an old man, and I am a coward, and I have not slept a full night in 3 years. Matteo stood up and pulled his gloves back on. You will not leave this city, he said. You will not call anyone. And in a few days I will come back, and you will say everything you just said to me in front of 5 other men. Do you understand? Yes. At the door, Matteo stopped. One more thing. If the body was not my brother, who was it? I do not know, the old man said. A young man, not more than 25 from the bones. That is all I could tell. It took Matteo's most quiet man 2 days to find the answer, and he found it in a place nobody in the family ever looked. The city's list of missing people. Thomas Falk, 24 years old, a mechanic. Last seen on the night of the fire, walking to a job he had been offered by a stranger on the phone. Good money, cash, 1 night of work at a warehouse. He never came home. His mother still put a light in her window. Matteo read that file 3 times, and then he sat in his car for a long while without starting it. They had not just tried to kill his brother. They had bought a poor boy for the coffin. Somebody had planned it that carefully, weeks in advance, and then had stood in a black dress in the ashes and cried into Matteo's chest. That evening he tested Bruno. Bruno had been his head of security for 11 years. Bruno had brought him the photographs of Ava at the pharmacy. Bruno had been the one to say she is hiding a man. Matteo poured him a drink and said casually, I want the old warehouse ground cleared. The one that burned. I'm putting a garden there before the wedding. Yes, boss. And Bruno, nobody touches Ava Bennett. She is my business now. Nobody goes near that street. Of course, boss, Bruno said. Wren Street, understood. Matteo kept his glass at his mouth for 1 extra second. He had never told Bruno the name of the street. He had never told anyone. Matteo put the glass down, smiled, clapped his old friend on the shoulder and said goodnight. Then he walked to his study, closed the door, and stood in the dark with his hands flat on the desk, breathing slowly, while the whole shape of the last 3 years turned around in his head like a key in a lock. His fiancée had buried a stranger in his brother's grave. His head of security was reporting to her. And there was a woman on Wren Street with no gun, no guards, and no idea that she was now the most dangerous secret in the city. His phone rang. It was Ava. Her voice was very low, almost a whisper, as if she were speaking with her hand around the phone. Sir, she said, there is a black car outside my house, no lights. It has been there for over an hour. Matteo was already moving toward the door. How many men? He asked. 2, she said. And one of them just got out. Matteo said, walking fast to his car. Listen to me and do exactly what I say. He is coming up the path, she whispered. Is the back door open? Yes. Lock it. Then turn off every light in the house, except the one in the kitchen. Leave the kettle on. Make it look like you are in the kitchen. He started the engine. Then take your brother, take Nico, and go into the bathroom and lock that door too. It is the smallest room, and it has no window. Whatever you hear, you do not open it. Not for anyone. Not even for a man who says he is police. Sir, Ava said, and her voice was small, he cannot walk. Matteo's hands closed on the wheel. Then drag him, he said. You are stronger than you think, Ava. You have carried him for 3 years already. The line went quiet for a moment. Then he heard a chair scrape, and her breathing, and the sound of a woman moving a grown man's weight by herself. I am doing it, she said. The knock came 4 minutes later. 3 polite taps. City gas, a man's voice called through the door. Ma'am, we have a leak reported on this street. We need to check the kitchen. In the dark bathroom, Ava sat on the floor with her back against the door and her brother in arms, of 3 years, lying beside her. One hand pressed over his mouth so his breathing would not be heard. City gas, the voice said again, less polite now. Then the handle turned, once, twice. Then something heavy hit the wood. Nico's hand found her wrist and squeezed. In the dark, he mouthed 2 words at her that she could not see but somehow understood anyway. Not tonight. The second hit split the doorframe at the front of the house. And then, from outside, came a sound Ava would remember for the rest of her life. Car doors. Fast footsteps on wet stone. A shout that turned into nothing halfway through. Then one gunshot. Then quiet. Then a knock on the bathroom door, and a voice she knew better than her own. "It is me," Matteo said. Open, there were two men. One was dead in the small front garden, next to the flower pots. The other one was alive, on his knees on the wet path, with his hands behind his back, and Matteo Salvatore standing over him. "Who sent you?" Matteo asked. The man looked up. He was young. He'd already understood who he was looking at, and he had already understood that this was the last conversation of his life. "Bruno," he said. "What were the orders?" The young man's mouth trembled. "The woman," he said. "And anybody else in the house. And after, turn on the gas. Make it look like an accident. Make it look like a fire. Make it look like a fire." Matteo stood in the rain and felt something in him go very still and very cold. These people had one idea. They had used it 3 years ago, and it had worked so well that they had reached for it again. "Who gives Bruno his orders?" he asked. "I do not know. I swear on my mother." "Then here is what you will do," Matteo said. "You will go back and tell Bruno the house was empty. You will tell him the woman ran. And in 3 days, when I ask you to stand in a room and repeat everything you just told me, you will do it." The young man stared. "And if I run tonight?" "Then you had better run faster than my family," Matteo said. "But if you stand where I tell you to stand, you will walk out of this city with your life and enough money to start again. That is more than the boy in my brother's grave was offered." By 3 in the morning, they were 40 miles out of the city, in a stone farmhouse that appeared on no paper anywhere, in the name of a dead uncle. Nico slept in a warm room for the first time in 3 years. Ava sat at the kitchen table, with a blanket around her shoulders and a cup of tea she had not touched. Matteo put a gun on the table between them. "It is loaded," he said. "You point it and you pull. That is all. I have never held one." "You held a hospital bed together with your own hands for 3 years, he said. "You will manage," she almost laughed. It came out closer to a sob. "They came to kill us," she said, "tonight." "Because of what I did?" "No." Matteo sat down opposite her. "They came because of what they did. There is a difference, and you will not carry theirs. Not in front of me." Then he told her everything. He told her about Dr. Rossi and the 40,000 in an envelope. About the dental records nobody checked. About Thomas Falk, 24 years old, a mechanic, offered good money for 1 night of work, whose mother still put a light in her window. He told her about Bruno saying Wren Street. And he told her about a woman in a black dress, holding a melted ring in the ashes, crying so hard that 4 men had to hold her up. When he finished, Ava sat very quietly. "You are supposed to marry her in 6 days, she said. "Yes. What will you do?" Matteo looked at his hands. "Something worse than not marrying her," he said. In the morning, Nico was sitting up in bed with the window open and the smell of wet fields coming in, and he looked at his brother for a long time. "You found the doctor," he said. "I found everything," Matteo said, "except the name." "And you are going to give it to me now?" Nico nodded slowly. He had known this moment was coming since the night he heard that bolt slide shut. "Camilla called me," he said. Matteo did not move. 2 days before the fire," Nico went on. "She was crying on the phone. She said she could not tell you because you would not believe her, and because it would tear the 2 families apart. She said she had found something in her father's house." "Found what?" Nico's good eye did not blink. "Proof of who really killed our father," he said. The room was completely silent. Somewhere outside, a bird was singing like it was an ordinary day. "So I went to the warehouse alone," Nico said, "because she asked me to. And she was not lying, Teo. That is the strange part. She was telling the truth. The proof was there, exactly where she said it would be. I found it. I put it in my coat pocket." He looked down at his bandaged left hand. And 30 seconds later, he said, "I smelled the smoke." Matteo leaned forward. "Where is that coat, Nico?" And from the doorway behind them, Ava spoke, in the voice of a woman who has just understood something 3 years too late. "It is in a box under my bed," she said. "The hospital gave me his things in a bag. I never opened it. It smelled of fire. They went back to Wren Street at first light, because that is the hour when men who watch houses are the most tired. Matteo drove a small grey car that belonged to nobody. Ava sat beside him with her hands folded in her lap. "There," she said quietly when they turned into the street. "Blue van. Second lamp post. I see it." The van sat with its windows fogged from the inside. Somebody was in there drinking coffee, waiting for a woman who had already gone. Matteo did not stop. He drove past her house, took the next left, and parked behind the old church at the end of the lane. "There is a wall at the back of my garden," Ava said. "My neighbor's cat gets over it. It is not tall. Then we will do what the cat does." Her house was worse in daylight. The front door hung open on one hinge, where the man had broken it. Rain had come in during the night and made a dark shape on the carpet. 3 years of hiding a man, and it had taken one night to break it all open. They went in through the back. Matteo kept his hand inside his coat the whole time. The bedroom was small and neat. A single bed, a lamp, a photograph on the wall of an older woman standing outside a house. "My mother," Ava said, following his eyes. "That is the house I sold." Matteo said nothing. There was nothing to say that would be big enough. She knelt down and pulled a cardboard box out from under the bed. It was old. The tape on the top had gone yellow. On one side, in hospital handwriting, someone had written, "Bed 9, personal effects unclaimed." "I could not open it," Ava said. "Every time I tried, my hands would not do it. It smelled of the fire. It smelled like the worst night of his life, and I had to look at him every morning." "Bring it," Matteo said. "We will open it where he can see." They were back over the wall in 90 seconds. Behind them in the blue van, a tired man stared at an empty house and had no idea that everything had just walked past him in a grey car. At the farmhouse, they put the box on the kitchen table. Nico sat in a chair by the window with a blanket over his legs. The morning light was hard on his face, but he did not turn away from it anymore. Matteo cut the old tape with a knife. The smell came out first. Smoke, cold, dead, 3 years old, but still there. Nico closed his eyes for a moment. Inside there was a wallet, black and stiff. A watch with a broken glass stopped at 11:47, a set of keys. And under all of it, folded, heavy, still smelling of the fire, a long, dark coat. Matteo lifted it out and held it in both hands. He remembered buying it. He had given it to his brother for his birthday. Nico had laughed and said it was too serious for him. The left sleeve was burned to nothing. "Pockets," Nico said. His voice had gone rough. "Inside pocket, left side." "That is where I put it." Matteo reached in, empty. He looked up. "It's not there." Ava went very pale. "It was never opened. I swear to you, it has been under that bed since the day the hospital—" "Wait," Nico leaned forward. "The lining. When I put it in, it went down. I remember. The pocket was torn, and the envelope went down inside the coat." Matteo turned the coat over, felt along the bottom edge with his fingers, and stopped. There was something flat inside the hem. He took out his knife and cut the lining open. An envelope slid out onto the kitchen table. It was brown, burned along one corner, and it had been closed with a piece of string wound around a small paper button. Nobody spoke. Matteo unwound the string. The first thing inside was a page torn from a ledger. Not a copy. The real page, thick and soft, the kind their father had used all his life. It was a list of payments, written by hand in small, tidy letters. Matteo knew that handwriting the way he knew his own name. It belonged to his uncle, Salvo Salvatore, his father's brother, the man who had taught Matteo to drive, the man who had stood at the funeral with his hand on Matteo's shoulder for 2 hours and never moved it. Halfway down the page was a payment made 5 years ago, a large one, and beside it a name, K. Nowak. "Nowak," Matteo said out loud. Nico nodded slowly. "The man who shot Papa. Nowak was an outsider. Nowak worked for nobody. That is what we were told. That is what we were told, Nico, and we hunted him for 2 months, and when we found him, he was already dead in a river." "Because somebody paid for that too," Nico said. Look at the next line. There was another payment 3 weeks later. No name. Just 2 words. Cleaning final. Matteo put the page down very carefully as if it were made of glass. The second thing in the envelope was a photograph. It showed a hunting lodge in the mountains. Snow on the ground. 4 men standing near a car, laughing at something outside the picture. 2 of them Matteo did not know. The third was Uncle Salvo, in a heavy coat with a cigarette in his hand. The fourth was Donaldo Vitale, Camilla's father. Matteo turned the photograph over. On the back, someone had written a date in pencil. It was 2 days before his father was killed. That is what I found, Nico said quietly. That is the proof. Uncle Salvo and old Vitale planned it together. They killed Papa, and then they made everybody believe it was an outsider, and then they came to the funeral and cried. Why? Eva asked. Why kill him? It was Matteo who answered. His voice had gone flat and strange. Because my father would never have agreed to the marriage, he said. He hated the Vitale family. He said they smiled like men counting your teeth. As long as he was alive, there would be no alliance. He was still looking at the photo. Kill the father and the son becomes the boss, he said. The son is younger. The son needs friends. And then they give the son a beautiful woman to marry. And one day, quietly, everything that belonged to my family belongs to hers. And Nico? Eva whispered. Nico was asking questions, Matteo said. And if I ever died, everything would go to him. So Nico had to be first. He put the photograph down. That is why they did not simply kill me, he said. A dead Matteo before the wedding gives them nothing. A married Matteo gives them everything. I was not the target. I was the door. Nico let out a long breath. Now you know all of it, he said. No, Matteo said. There is one more. There was a third thing in the envelope. Another photograph, stuck to the back of the first one by 3 years of pressure and smoke. Matteo peeled them apart slowly. It was the same lodge. The same snow, taken a few seconds later, or a few seconds before. But this one was wider. In this one, you could see the doorway of the lodge. And in the doorway, holding a fur coat over her arm, standing close enough to hear every word those 4 men were saying, was a young woman. She was looking straight at the camera. Camilla. Ava's hand went to her mouth. Nico stared at the picture as if it had bitten him. I never saw that one, he said. I had 30 seconds, Teo. I opened the envelope, I saw the ledger, I saw the first photo, and then I smelled the smoke and I ran. Matteo Salvatore sat down slowly in a wooden kitchen chair. For 5 years, he had believed his father was killed by an outsider. For 3 years, he had believed his brother died in an accident. For 3 years, he had held a woman while she cried into his shirt about a fire she had helped to light, and he had promised her in a graveyard, with his hand on the stone, that he would take care of her forever. He had been living inside a story that other people had written for him. He stood up, walked out of the kitchen and went into the yard, and he stayed there for a long time with his hands on the cold stone wall and his head down. Ava came out after 10 minutes. She did not speak. She just put a cup of tea on the wall beside his hand and stood there. Say something, Matteo said finally. You want me to say it is not your fault? No, he said. I know whose fault it is. I want to know why you stayed. Ava looked out at the wet fields. Because for 3 years, she said, the only 2 decent men I ever met were both in danger, and one of them did not even know it. Matteo turned his head and looked at her. She picked up the tea and pushed it into his hand. Drink that, she said. You have not eaten since Tuesday. That afternoon, Matteo Salvatore stopped grieving and started working. He could have killed them. He had the men, and he had the reason, and in his world nobody would have asked a single question. But a bullet would only make Camilla dead. It would not make her guilty. Her father would call it jealousy. The other families would say the Salvatore boy went mad before his wedding, and Uncle Salvo would put his hand on somebody else's shoulder at another funeral. So Matteo did something colder. He decided to let the wedding happen. Not the marriage. The wedding. 600 guests. 5 families. Every important man in the city, in one room in their best suits, all watching. "You want an audience?" Nico said when he heard. "I want witnesses," Matteo said. Over the next 4 days, he moved his pieces quietly. Dr. Rossi was collected from his flat above the bakery and driven to a hotel outside the city, with 2 men outside his door and 1 bottle of good wine inside it. The young gunman from Wren Street was kept in a garage, fed 3 times a day, and told exactly where he would be standing on Saturday. A woman named Falk, who had put a light in her window every night for 3 years, opened her door to find the head of the Salvatore family standing on her step with his hat in his hands. What he said to her took 20 minutes. What she said back to him took 2 hours. She agreed to come, and on Thursday evening Matteo had dinner with his uncle. Salvatore was 66, warm, loud, always laughing. He poured the wine himself and talked about the old days. "Your father would have been proud, boy," he said. 2 families, 1 house. This is what he always wanted. "Yes," Matteo said. "It is exactly what he wanted." "Are you nervous?" "A little." "Good." Salvo laughed and squeezed his nephew's hand across the table. "A man should be nervous. It means it matters." "Uncle," Matteo said, "stand beside me on Saturday. At the front, where everybody can see you." Salvo's eyes went shiny. "Of course. Of course I will." "Good," Matteo said and smiled. "I want you close." On Friday night, Camilla came to his house in a green dress. She walked around his study, touching things. The way a woman touches things in a room she has already decided is hers. "Bruno says the girl has left the city," she said. "So I hear. And the man she was hiding, gone too," Matteo said. "It is finished, Camilla. There is nothing left on that street but an empty house." She smiled at him then, and it was the same smile he had seen at a graveside and at 100 dinners and across a coffee cup that very morning. "Tomorrow everything becomes one," she said. "Yes," said Matteo Salvatore. "Tomorrow everything comes out." She did not notice. She kissed him good night and went home to try on her veil. At 6 o'clock on Saturday morning, while the church bells were being tested across the city, Matteo's phone rang. It was not Ava, it was not his men, it was Camilla, and her voice was calm and pleasant, the way it always was. "Good morning, my love," she said. "Before you come to the church, I think you should know something." Matteo said nothing. "A very old farmhouse," Camilla said. 40 miles out. Your dead uncle's name on the papers. Bruno remembered it last night. He heard her smile. "So bring the envelope with you," she said. "And come alone. Or your brother is going to die twice." For 3 seconds after Camilla said it, Matteo Salvatore did not answer. Then he said very calmly, "Which farmhouse?" "Do not play with me, my love." "I am not playing," he said. "I am asking which one." "Because there are 2 and you have the wrong one." He hung up on her. Then he put the phone in his pocket, straightened his tie in the mirror, and allowed himself, for the first time in 9 days, a small and very ugly smile. Because on Thursday night at dinner, he had told exactly 1 person about the old farmhouse 40 miles out of the city in his dead uncle's name. He had told Bruno. Camilla's men reached the farmhouse at 7 that morning. 4 cars, 9 men. The gate was open. The house was warm. There was a kettle on the stove and a blanket on a chair by the window, as if somebody had just stood up. There was nobody in it. The men who were waiting for them in the barn and behind the stone wall had been there since 2 in the morning, and they were Salvatore men. The old ones, the ones who had carried Matteo's father's coffin. Not 1 shot was fired. When 9 men look up and see 30 rifles, they put their guns on the ground, and they do it quickly. Bruno was the last one out of the car. He looked at the empty house for a long moment, and then he understood, and his legs stopped working properly. "He knew," he said. "He knew on Tuesday." "He knew when you said the name of the street," somebody answered. At 10 o'clock the church on Marlow Hill was full. 600 guests, 5 families, every important man in the city in his best suit, sitting in a hard wooden seat and smelling of cologne. Flowers on every column, white ribbon on every door. Matteo Salvatore stood at the front in a black suit, and beside him, exactly where he had asked him to stand, stood his uncle Salvo, laughing his big laugh, shaking hands, patting shoulders. At the back, the great doors opened, and Camilla Vitale came in on her father's arm, in a dress that had taken 4 women 11 months to sew. She was pale. She had been making phone calls for 2 hours, and nobody had answered them. But she walked up that aisle with her chin high, because she was her father's daughter, and because 600 people were watching, and because there was still one thing she was sure of. Matteo Salvatore did not know how to stand in front of a crowd and break it all apart. She reached the front. Donaldo Vitale placed her hand in Matteo's. The priest opened his book, and Matteo said, "Father, 1 moment, please." He turned around and faced the church. "Before we begin," he said, "a man in my position should say a few words about family. Please, sit." 600 people sat down. Camilla's fingers tightened on his sleeve. "Matteo," she whispered, "what are you doing?" "Something my father should have been allowed to do," he said without looking at her. Then he lifted his voice. "Most of you were at my father's funeral 5 years ago," he said. "And most of you were at my brother's funeral 3 years ago. Today, before I marry, I'm going to tell you what actually happened at both of them." The church went so quiet that the candles could be heard burning. "Doctor!" Matteo called. "Come in, please." The side door opened and old Dr. Emile Rossi walked in, thin and grey, holding his hat in both hands like a schoolboy. He stood in front of 500 years of families and told them, in a shaking voice, that he had signed a death certificate for Nico Salvatore without checking a single tooth, that the identification had been made at the scene by Miss Camilla Vitale, that an envelope with 40,000 in cash had arrived at his door the day after the funeral, with no name on it, and that he had kept it, and that he had not slept properly since. A sound went through the church like wind through wheat. Don Vitale stood up. "This old man is a drunk. Sit down," Matteo said. He said it quietly. Vitale sat down. "Bring in the second one," Matteo said. 2 men brought in the young gunman from Wren Street. He was clean and fed and terrified, and he told the truth in a fast, flat voice, that he had been sent 5 nights ago to a small yellow house, that the order was the woman inside and anybody else in the house, and that afterwards he was to open the gas and make it look like a fire. "Who gave you that order?" Matteo asked. "Bruno Adami." "And where is Bruno Adami this morning?" "In a barn," the young man said, 40 miles outside the city. Somebody in the 3rd row laughed once out of pure shock and then stopped. Camilla had not moved. She was still holding her flowers. Her face had become very smooth and very still, the way water goes still before it freezes. "Now," Matteo said, "the part that will cost you your sleep." He nodded, and a small woman in a black coat came through the side door. She was about 60. Her shoes were old. She was carrying a photograph in a cheap frame. "This is Mrs. Irina Falk," Matteo said. 3 years ago, her son went to a warehouse at night because a stranger had called him and offered him good money for 1 night of work. His name was Thomas. He was 24. He fixed cars. He never came home, and for 3 years this woman has kept a light burning in her window in case he did. He paused. "On Thursday, with a priest and a judge present, I opened my brother's grave. The church made a noise then. Several men crossed themselves. The teeth in that coffin," Matteo said, "belonged to Thomas Falk. It has been checked twice. That poor boy has been lying under my family's name for 3 years, while his mother waited at a window." Mrs. Falk did not cry. She simply stood there and looked at Camilla Vitale, and it was worse than crying. Then Matteo took the burned envelope out of his coat. He held up the ledger page. "This is my uncle's handwriting," he said. "He payment 5 years ago to a man named Nowak. Nowak shot my father. 3 weeks later, there is a second payment, with 2 words beside it. Cleaning. Final. And 3 weeks later, Nowak was found dead in the river. And we all said what a shame it was that we would never learn the truth. Uncle Salvo's face had gone the color of paper." Matteo held up the first photograph. A hunting lodge. 2 days before my father was killed, my Uncle Salvo and Donaldo Vitale, laughing together, he let them look. He let them look for a long time, and he watched the faces of the other 4 families change while they looked. Because those men could count, and they could see, and now they were doing arithmetic about their own dead relatives. And this one, Matteo said, was stuck to the back of it for 3 years. He held up the second photograph. The doorway, the fur coat, the young woman looking straight into the camera. The whole church turned all together and stared at the bride. She was 19, Matteo said. She stood in that doorway and heard 4 men plan my father's murder. And then she waited 5 years, and she smiled at me over dinner, and she came to my father's grave with flowers, and she agreed to marry me. Matteo, Camilla said. And when my brother started asking questions, he continued, she called him, crying, and told him she had found proof. And she was not even lying. She sent him to the real proof, in the real place, because she knew he would check. And when he was inside, somebody bolted the back door from the outside, while he beat on it with his hands until they burned. Matteo, Camilla said again, louder. You want to say I have no proof of that last part, Matteo said. You want to say the fire is a story, and the door is a story, and that there is nobody left alive who heard that bolt. He looked at the great doors at the back of the church. Nico, he called. Come in. The doors opened. Nico Salvatore came up the aisle slowly, on 2 sticks, in a suit that hung loose on him, with half of his face burned smooth, and the other half exactly as 600 people remembered it. He walked past the men who had carried his coffin. Nobody in that building breathed. He stopped in front of Camilla Vitale and looked at her from very close. Hello, Camilla, he said in his broken smoke voice. I heard your father's name in the smoke that night, but I never heard yours. He turned his head and looked at the second photograph in his brother's hand. I should have looked at that picture for 2 seconds longer, Nico said. It cost me 3 years. Camilla Vitale did not scream. She did not faint or beg or run. She looked at the 600 faces staring at her. And she understood that she had already lost everything, and so she stopped acting. And what was underneath was so cold that the men in the front row moved back. Your father was going to bury both our families, she said. He was a stubborn old man who could not see a single year into the future. I saw it, nobody else did. I built something out of the mess he left, and I built it well, and I would have made you the biggest name in this country. You would have made me the door, Matteo said. Yes, she said, and you would never have known. That is the part you cannot forgive. Matteo Salvatore looked at the woman he had almost married. You are right, he said. I cannot. What happened after that took less than an hour, and it was done the way those things are done in that world, quietly by old men in a side room. Salvo Salvatore was taken out through the back door of the church by 3 men who had loved his brother. Nobody in that city ever saw him again, and nobody ever asked. Don Aldo Vitale walked into that church as the head of one of the 5 families, and he walked out with nothing. The other 4 voted before the flowers had wilted. His ports, his warehouses, and his name went to the Salvatore family as blood price. He died 2 years later in a rented room, and 11 people came. And Camilla, Matteo did not touch her. He gave every page, every photograph, every recording, and the whole story of Thomas Falk to the city police, in front of witnesses, in daylight. It was the last thing anybody expected the head of the Salvatore family to do, and it was the one thing her world could not fix with money or a phone call. You will live a long life, he told her as they took her out. And every single day of it you will be nobody. Thomas Falk came home in the spring. They took the stone with the Salvatore name off the grave, and they gave the boy back to his mother. And he was buried again properly, with his own name on him. And the whole Salvatore family stood in the rain at the funeral of a mechanic. Mrs. Falk turned the light in her window off for the first time in 3 years. Nico had 4 operations that year. He learned to walk without the sticks. His voice never came all the way back, and he stopped minding. And Ava Bennett? She tried to resign again in the autumn. She put a letter on the desk, 2 lines, very neat. Matteo read it, folded it, and put it in his pocket. Denied, he said. Sir Ava, he stood up. For 3 years you fed my brother, paid for his medicine with your mother's house, and asked me for nothing. You were the only person in my life who never once wanted anything from me. Do you know what that makes you in a family like mine? She shook her head. The most valuable person alive, he said. There was a wedding on Marlow Hill the following June. It was small. 40 people, no ribbons, no photographers, and a bride in a plain dress who had once sold her mother's house to keep a stranger breathing. Nico Salvatore walked her up the aisle himself, slowly, without sticks, and when the priest asked who gave this woman, he said, in his broken voice, loud enough for everyone, "The family she saved."